I'm Diane Kendig, and this poem is titled Alms for Lorca. It has an epigraph from an old Spanish folk story about a man and woman standing outside the gates of Granada, which was Lorca's hometown, and there was a blind beggar. The man turned to the woman and said these words, which are the epigraph: "Give him alms, woman, for nothing in life can equal the agony of being blind in Granada." Alms for Lorca. Reading how they shot you on a hill before dawn could disclose anything, I recall your poem, "If I Die, Leave the Balcony Open." And I want you to be left with that vista: children eating oranges, reapers cutting wheat. So nearsighted, you wrote your hometown into ballads and hondos, even from Harlem, even from Madrid. You wanted to watch it forever, even when echoes of blood foreshadowed your return and shuttered your windows. What agony to see your Granada become one dark prison cell. I can only imagine from the thick blank cataract of paper you left on the table in that last room. And sickened, I turn again to your work, Bright Denial of Death, and I want to go on leaning out windows and doorways and bring you oranges and wheat, and I want to leave everyone's balcony open. This poem was written by a 14-year-old girl in Nicaragua, and I translated it for my second book. I'm going to read it in Spanish and then in English. The Spanish is Guerrillero. Lirios para la iglesia y un lápiz para escribir tu nombre. Guerrilla warrior, lilies for the church, and a pencil to write your name. This poem is all about the sounds. I got the idea from Dave Van Ronk's Garden State Stomp. Mine's called Ohio Rag. Mitawanga, Moxahala, Punderson, Rising Sun, Overpeck, Knockemstiff, Powhatan, Shunbrun, Cuyahoga, Ashtabula, Chillicothe, Galleon, Weirton, Whitaville, Steubenville, Hicksville, Coolville, Crooksville, Celeryville, Dry Run. Tuscarawas, Broken Sword, Chippewa, Tippecanoe, Massillon, Wauseon, Gallipolis, Bellevue, Mingo, Junction, Janaden, Hutton, Tam O'Shanter, Mesopotamia, Timberlake, Lakeline, Roaming Shores, Bayview. Wapakoneta, Wakatomika, Osceola, Mogador, Chickasaw, Ottawa, Geauga, Sycamore, Bucyrus, Conneaut, Grape Grove, Greasy Ridge, Hartsgrove, Antiquity, Felicity, Latonia, Pavonia, Macedonia, Sagamore. This is the interlude. Dark, stark, eerie, gore, chagrin, Painesville. New Hope, Hopewell, Hopedale, Fairhope, Mount Repose. Hugh, Creola, Blue Ash, Redbird, Greenview, Orangeville, Black Horse, Yellow Springs. Jellaway, Auglaize, Champaign, Licking, LaRue. Matamoros, Blennerhassett, Pymatuning, Hocking, Buena Vista, Wyandotte, Scioto Paulding, Bracknell, Roxbell, Magnolia, Bald Knob, Brown Bottom, Dillis Bottom, Stringtown, Reimer, Ouija, Salinas, Delvideo, Cocosing. Allegheny, Willowick, Athenium, Farmersville, Getaway, Montpelier, Palestine, Pemberville, Rolandus, Oneida, Calida, Dresden, Malvern, Guernsey, Unity, Seneca, Savona, Verona, Reminderville. In one of my many visits to the 91-year-old Cleveland poet Russell Atkins, I had this experience that I just had to write about. It's titled Visiting Russell with Alarm. A man shouted, "I'm here to get the body," as he came in the door with a gurney. The door alarm went off. Russell, whose room at the Grand Pavilion Nursing and Rehabilitation is just inside this door and this alarm, he looked up and said softly, "Oh no." Then Russell and I returned to our work, transcribing his new poem. But the alarm, which is piercing did not stop. The man shrugged sheepishly and continued down the hall with his rattling cart. The alarm continued. It screeched, on and on. I went and stood out in the hall looking desperate. An aide came into Russell's room, grabbed a long clamp for reaching things, and whacked the alarm with it. It stopped. Moments later, the man came back with the body on the gurney, which got stuck halfway out the door, setting the alarm off again. The man wheeled the body back in, closed the door, and started over, looking up at us apologetically and shrugging again as the alarm went off for the third time. An aide shouted to him to lean on the alarm and the door at the same time. As these were over 3 feet apart, he stood puzzling that. Finally, an employee arrived and leaned on the alarm while the gurney driver leaned on the door. The door opened, the alarm stopped, the body rolled out the door. Russell and I went back to work on his new poem, titled Rest Home. The title poem of my newest book, Prison Terms, has an epigraph from William Matthews. None here thinks a pink slip is underwear. None here says lingerie, or as it were. Prison Terms. Flat time, like a flat rate, is non-negotiable. It is what you served on no platter after you, not your cover, which was already blown, were turned down the last time for parole. A word that used to mean word of honor, and now means sooner but conditional, or man, you are booking. Not to say booked, the start often of a very long sentence with no syntax, though we don't know that as we are strung along. When we read your bail amount nearly doubled at arraignment, we could only reason a typo. But when we spoke to you about it, by phone, through the milky plexiglass, you told us they printed it exactly as announced in court in no uncertain terms. The capriciousness came to mind then and in the months since. I don't think of these words as terms of art or anything I can come to terms with anytime soon. Daniel Thompson was a wonderful Cleveland poet. This poem is titled Taking Daniel Thompson into Medium. For years, he'd tell me he wanted to go to prison with me. Prison, I told him, is not jail. I thought he'd be the last writer I'd ever take into prison. Storied for his 70s stint in the Cleveland jail for protest, demanding herbal tea and vegetarian food, Daniel was loved by the judge, who happily sentenced him to give poetry readings, and gladly did he serve. And at the end, during what inmates would call my short time, I decided he was the last writer I wanted to take into prison. I called, and he came and could have been a chaplain, so piously quietly he submitted to entry procedures. We made the half-mile walk to the cavernous shift change room, set up, and he read to a crowd of 80 or so. Though if you knew him, you know he said, not read. He chanted and cooed, beginning with, "Those in power always want those in poverty to live on poetry." The room got quieter and hotter, and Daniel's voice got louder. The guards began to gather in the back, first a gray shirt, then several white shirts. How can there be so many white shirts left this late? I thought, damn, we're about to be ousted. For the passion he was raising in the place, I assumed, until I noticed the guards were applauding, that in fact they loved Daniel's hymn to the veterans in the marketplace. Crew-toothed, blue, open flies, eyes of salt, and humor surviving wars and rumors. And they nodded to his complaint about justice as a railroad. One did take exception to Daniel's Dillinger poem, and he shouted, "But he did shoot the deputy." I have to tell you that I have never heard Daniel so loud and clear, despite his age and weariness, about 6 months before the first cancer diagnosis. All the reverberations off metal doors and concrete floors and walls. He gathered up everything he had on injustice and hurt, all those broken letters of the earth, love's new light he still held out for, and man, he sang them off. In that hard room, Daniel took us all into the purpose of poetry, breaking our hearts. Some men wept. Taking Daniel out of prison would have been harder, except he was tired, and even he did not want to sleep there. Finally out, I drove. He rode shotgun, his right arm along the open window. He chuckled and repeated, "But he did shoot the deputy," on the long ride home that exceptionally warm and starry autumn Friday night that Daniel took the prison. After 40 years away from home, I moved back and into the house that I was born and raised in. Reedurban, Ohio. The boom of my youth wakes me now, as it didn't then, the hammer I recognized later as the blunt, indefatigable fact. The fact is that I have returned in my indeterminate age to this region of stainless steel and roller bearings. Timken cylindrical, tapered, spherical, thrust and needle roller bearings. Plath was right, too. It is not a heart. "It's the drop forge plant, honey," my father answered when I asked. And much later I learned the forge drops a die, larger but like the die that took my grandfather's thumb, and only one die is needed to finish off any part. Now I know, too, that the extra space between dies is called the flash, which is what it has all gone by in, as other sounds of my youth, too, its particular rock and roll of WHBC AM, along with the train passing behind our high school, forcing the band to pause in its halftime show, our teachers to wait mid-sentence for the loud rush to finish. I recall Mr. Cudione's voice intoning a mole, 6.02, then the stay, the wheel repeating 6.02, 6.02, then times 10 to the 23rd. To this day I do not know what a mole is, but its trochees and iambs, its one anapest sound in me as the whistle my engineer grandfather pulled to wave to Grandma as he passed through town at 7 a.m. 2 longs and a short. "Listen," she would say to me over our wheat checks. "Listen,